to your.
Got it.
It'll save it to your computer, and then you have to drop it if you're going to mail it somewhere.
Okay.
Hi, Tom.
Good morning.
How are you? Long time no see.
It's been a while. Yeah. I'm fine. How about you, Robbie?
We've been doing pretty well, staying busy with the kids. 2 of them are in college right now, so.
Oh my gosh. Where are they?
Yeah. Matthew goes to Georgia Tech and Laura goes to Middle Georgia State University.
Ah,
It's in Cochran, Georgia, and her classes are in Eastman, Georgia. She actually lives on one of their campuses and her classes are on another campus that's nearby.
Wow.
So, yep. So they're away, but the other 2 are still here.
gee. Well, one day soon.
I like having them at home.
Gosh, we went through all this grief when my first child went off, and went to Georgia and drove home, and I could even see for the tear. It was just you had this feeling nothing that would ever be the same, and he comes back a couple of weeks later with laundry over over Labor Day, and I said, Charlie, how was he? He said, this has been the best 3 weeks of my life. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yep. I thoroughly understand.
Even though they're not very far away with the present situation, they're really discouraged from being home very much. So
Yeah,
Matthew hasn't been home since he moved onto campus at the beginning of August. Laura did come home one time because she forgot some stuff that she needed for school. She has to wear a uniform and she'd forgotten some of her components of her uniform. So she had to come home and get that.
Wow. I didn't know there was a college that required uniforms. What's the uniform like?
Her program requires the uniform. She's in an aviation program, and she goes to Middle Georgia State University, and most of the students there don't have to wear a uniform, but for her particular program, they do have to wear it. It's just all black. So she has black pants. They have a specific shirt that they have to purchase from the school that, it says aviation on it or something like that. But it's a black polo that just, has it embroidered on it. And then they have to wear a belt. They have to wear certain kind of shoes. Like it has to be, they can't wear tennis shoes or anything with laces. It has to be something that won't easily get punctured, I guess. Because she's doing aviation maintenance and they work with tools a lot. She's in a machine shop. So, she has to have protective shoe wear.
How interesting. That is a very interesting course of study. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She seems to like it.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and others may be joining us along the way, but we will start with prayer and we'll take off from there. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Couple of housekeeping things. As I said, if you don't hear me or anything, or I'm not loud enough, or something goes wrong, just wave your hand or jump in. I'm hoping to keep our discussion mainly at the end of everything. So feel free to put in a chat if you want to have a question up there, or just remember your question to the end, at the end. Let's see. Last week we talked about the original story of Job as a sort of fable, as a folk tale, the kind that were common in the Middle East that went around probably for centuries orally by mouth, probably not written down for centuries. In this fable, God makes a bet with Satan, and of course this is not the Satan of later belief. Satan is the devil or the Lord of hell, as we see in Milton or Dante. but Satan, just another kind of a wise guy in the heavenly court, kind of a, not a court jester exactly, but sort of a disruptor a little bit, somebody with an attitude. He says, Job loves you because of all the blessings you've given him. Take him away and he'll curse you. So it's a bet. So it's a simple fable. God takes away blessings, allows Satan to do terrible things to him, but patient Job simply endures his suffering. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Then God gives it back. Very simple folktale. And the folktale Job seems also to even speak directly to the substance of the bet, to Satan's challenge. The fable Job says, shall we accept good from God, but not accept evil as well? And we talked last week about the later Roman virtue of Stoicism, that ability to sort of steel ourselves and endure with patience what is inevitable and to get through what we have to get through. One of our questions for reflection last week was, are there times when we are called to this virtue of Stoicism? And then the deeper question was, is our love for God dependent on the good things that happen to us? We will have, as I say, we'll have some. You may want to address that at the end of the discussion as well. But this week we have a very different kind of Job. Remember, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Well, that Job is gone. In his place is a Job who is. How would you describe this Job? How would you guys describe this Job? The tone of voice. Starting in chapter 3.
Angry or mad that he's being picked on.
Yeah, and hurt. It's the kind of anger that comes from a deep wound or deep hurt. And the most profound way that this poet can describe that depth of human hurt is through poetry. And if you'll notice, through most of your translations, when you go from chapter 2 to 3, it turns into poetry. You go from prose to poetry. So we're going to look at this in the sequence as we are doing in this course: literary, then theological, and then spiritual. In other words, how this biblical material might to speak to our emotional and spiritual journey. So let's read some poetry. Job chapter 3, that in this newest translation by Robert Alter tries to capture in English some of the power of the Hebrew. Job 3, verse 1. Job spoke up and said, annul the day I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. That day let it be darkness. Let God above not seek it out, nor brightness shine upon it. Let darkness, death's shadow, foul it. Let a cloud mass rest upon it. Let day gloom dismay it. That night let murk overtake it. Let it not join in the days of the year. Let it not enter the number of months. Oh, let that night be barren. Let it have no song of joy. Let the day cursers hex it, those ready to rouse Leviathan. Let its twilight stars go dark. Let it hope for day in vain, and let it not see the eyelids of dawn. So the very first words of this poet, author of this part of the book, in the Hebrew, these words just punch like fists. Annul the day I was born. The New Revised Standard Version says, let the day perish in which I was born. In Hebrew, there's what is called emphatic alliteration. Alliteration, you remember from your English classes, when all the words begin with the same consonant, like headlines tend to do. Council condemns committee. That alliterative, that boom, boom, boom. In Hebrew, annul the day I was born is yo va yom twalid bo. Annul the day I was born. And then follows, and the night that said a man-child is conceived. This is an example of what is called poetic intensification. Poetic intensification. not just annul the day I was born, but he even goes back 9 months to his conception, and the imagery intensifies from day to night. Not just the day I was born, but the night I was conceived. That sets up this a series of brilliant sets of poetic imagery, of day-night images, each one intensifying the effect of the one before. Now, if you've studied the Psalms before, you've probably run across the notion that biblical poetry has a lot of what we call parallelism. You know, you say a line and then you say the line, the same thing, but in a different way for emphasis. You know, "Old King Cole's merry old soul," and "a merry old soul was he." Same line, but with a little different, said a little differently. In the Psalms, you have something like Psalm 91:5. "You shall not be afraid of any terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by the day, of the plague that stalks in the darkness, nor of the sickness that lays waste at midday." Parallelism depends on the creative use of synonyms, you know, words that are different but mean almost the same thing. The plague that stalks in the darkness, the sickness that lays waste at midday. Robert Alter says that this Job poet does this better than any other poet in the entire Bible. As Robert Alter, as he puts it, he compounds the primary term Hoseth, or darkness, with Saloheth, death's shadow, darkness, death's shadow. And then Anana, cloud mass, with the unique, he just makes up a word apparently, Kimri Yom, day gloom. He makes up the word day gloom. Athal, murk, with a series of verbs that indicate a befouling, obscuring, or shutting down of light. So listen again with these literary, with these literary devices. "That day, let it be darkness. Let God above not seek it out, nor brightness shine upon it. Let darkness, death's shadow, foul it. Let a cloud mass rest upon it. Let day gloom dismay it. That night let murk overtake it. Let it not join in the days of the year. Let it not enter the number of months. Oh, let that night be barren. Let it have no song of joy. Let the day cursors hex it, those ready to rouse Leviathan. Let its twilight stars go dark. Let it hope for day in vain, and let it not see the eyelids of dawn." You can see here yet another source of brilliance by this poet, and that is the use of mythology in his imagery. The Leviathan, which you'll see throughout the poem, especially with the whirlwind at the end. The Leviathan is the fearsome sea monster of Canaanite mythology. In some versions, it has 7 heads. This sea monster who has to be subdued by the weather god, whose realm is the dry land. So he's suggesting, this unloosing of the things that keep things together. The day curses, by the way, are probably those Canaanite mythological creatures who have the power of language over the dreaded beasts of the sea and keep them in their place. So who threaten the ordered realm of creation. As Jonathan Alter puts it, the poetry of Job then, at least in its metaphors, reaches deep into the chaotic sea, up to the stars where celestial beings dwell, and down into the kingdom of death, that shadowy underworld bordered by a current that can only be crossed in one direction. In this poem, he says, where intensification is the key to so much, mythology serves as the ultimate intensifier. So, even if we weren't interested in the theology or the theodicy here, we could easily be studying the work as poetry alone. The poetry alone is worth great study. So overall, what's also notable about this poet is his use of the natural world, and it's just extraordinary. similes and metaphors of everyday life, weaving, agriculture, labor practices, meteorology, even the preparation of foods. He uses everything in just a wonderful way. Here, for example, is a representation of, of all things, of the formation of the embryo from shapeless plasma in the womb. Job 10:10 says, "Why, you poured me out like milk, and like cheese, you curdled me." Again, notice the parallelism and the intensification. Poured me out like milk, like cheese, you curdled me, from milk to curdled cheese. All in one line. Another example, Job compares the way his friends had betrayed him to the drying up in the summer of a wadi, a desert gulch that may be filled with water during the rainy season. And this is found in 6:15. And then he proceeds for 5 lines to follow the seasonal cycle, the melting of the snow and ice, the caravans crossing the desert, looking for sources of water in a kind of desperation. So watch for these sort of poetic devices as we read through these extraordinary speeches. And then, try to imagine how powerful they must be in the original magnificent Hebrew language. I might, one of these weeks, I might get one of my Hebrew professors just to read part of this in Hebrew, just to listen to the music of it, because it's really magnificent. So, now to the theological, the spiritual side of this poetry. If you were an actor or actress saying these lines on stage, what would be the guiding emotion that would underlie your reading? What would be, above all else, Job is, how would you all play that as an actor or an actress?
Despair.
Say again?
Despair.
Despair. What else?
I think it would have an undertone of anger.
Anger, yeah. All 3 of those things would interplay, probably line by line. You would probably go from anger to hurt.
I think there's self-pity also.
Okay. Eliphaz is certainly going to point that out, isn't he?
About passion. He's very,
Mm-hmm.
I hear.
Okay. So this opening of Job's early speech has been called, I think rightly so, a death wish poem. A death wish poem. Things are so bad. Why was I not buried like a stillborn child, like an infant that never sees the light? Again, the parallelism. As Joni Mitchell would put it many, many years later in her song, Sire of Sorrow, better I was carried from the womb straight to the grave. I see the diggers waiting, they're leaning on their spades. Mm-hmm. And this section ends with that sort of basic dilemma of being a human being. We suffer, and yet, unlike the animals, we know it in a philosophical or spiritual way. We realize that we are suffering. We can take a step aside and look at ourselves and realize we are suffering. We see a light of wisdom that tells us you are suffering. And that wisdom gives us the unique ability to ask, why? Why am I suffering? And so Job asks, in a sense, not just why am I suffering, but more broadly, why is human existence this way? He's hinting, at this point, he's hinting at a criticism of God here, that God would have created the universe in this way. Job says, why is light given to one in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it does not come? Why is light given to one who cannot see the way, whom God has fenced in? He's getting close to criticism. Truly the thing I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. For I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. That's 3, verse 13 through 26. I am not at ease. So in this first speech by Job, poet Job, I would argue the real Job, he's just putting it out there. I am suffering, and I am not quiet about it. In other words, I am not being stoic. Maybe I'm not being stoic anymore. He's not yet saying to God directly, why is this happening to me? Or why have you allowed this to happen to me? But at this early point, more of a general, why did you create a world in which this kind of suffering is happening? He's getting warmed up for the greater question that is theodicy. How can a God of love and justice at least allow such terrible things to happen to good people, or to inordinately terrible things to happen? But even that warm-up is making Job's friends a little nervous, a little anxious. Chapter 4, Eliphaz the Temanite answers. He says, if one ventures a word with you, will you be offended? But who can keep from speaking? In other words, can I just say a word or two here without you jumping down my throat? I mean, I've been sitting here and I just can't keep quiet about some of the stuff you've been saying. And here, the poet is brilliant. This is a brilliant chapter. The Hebrew, for one thing, the Hebrew, now we would know this in English, but the Hebrew poetry of the friends is not quite as brilliant as the poet when Job speaks. In other words, he makes a stylistic difference. It's a little more plain, a little more pedantic. But more importantly, watch what Eliphaz says and how he says it. Look, says Eliphaz, you've instructed many, you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have supported those who are stumbling. And now it comes to you and you are impatient. It touches you and you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Now, actually, he's got a pretty good point. He's got a pretty good point. Job, you do give out a lot of advice about how to be a good and spiritual and faithful person. I mean, maybe. So where's that faith now that things aren't going so well? You know, we have several English phrases that would cover this, especially when we think of teachers or leaders who don't especially model what they teach. Things like, Job, you know, why don't you practice what you preach? Or put your money where your mouth is, or maybe even the most ultimate, physician, heal thyself. You know, we are very aware when people we set up on a pedestal don't live up to it, especially when they put themselves on that pedestal. But then the poet has Eliphaz fall into an incredible theological trap. Right after the virtuous, is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Eliphaz drops this in. He said, think now, who that was innocent ever perished?
Everyone.
You got to think that, you know, Job's sitting there. You got to think that Job's doing this. When who was innocent ever perished? You got to think that Job's going, me. I'm sitting right here, you know, as my kids would say, well, duh, you know. So that trap is sprung. The whole theology of God's rewards and punishments, of blessings and misfortunes, that theology that says that the blessings match up with the misfortunes, or the blessings and, you know, Oh, put it this way, blessings and misfortunes line up squarely with human sins and behaviors. That theology that says that those two things line up, that whole theology is suddenly blown away. Part of the poet's brilliance is that this theology, called the Deuteronomist theology, by the way, it's found in a lot of the book of Deuteronomy, has a lot of truth in it. He reminds Job of a basic truth in Hebraistic belief. One of those is that God is God. And part of that fear of God, or as we said last week, that awesomeness and respect we owe God, means that we human beings do not have the same status or perhaps even the perspective that God has. The other side of that belief that God is God, is that we human beings are not. And that's very true. Much of our trouble comes in getting that mixed up. In fact, in a kind of mystic vision, Eliphaz hears a whisper that says, "Can mortals be righteous before God?" In other words, can human beings be pure before their maker? Another parallel. Can mortals be righteous before God? Can human beings be pure before their maker? Well, of course, the answer is no. However, it's another example that if you take a basic good theology and take it too far in a direction, it doesn't work. You can say, the Deuteronomist is right in a sense. You can say being good and just and loving will lead to a good life. You will be a better person. You will have a good life. If you do what the Torah says, if you are good and just and loving, you will have a good life. But as Job is about to prove, the opposite is not true. If you are enduring great suffering, it does not mean that you have sinned. It does not mean that you have not been a good and just and loving person. See, the one can be true, but the other one cannot be true. Sometimes great suffering comes to those who have done everything right. That's part of life. Sometimes great suffering comes to those who have done everything right, so to speak. Moreover, says Eliphaz, so this is what's brilliant about this. He doesn't just, the poet doesn't just set up a straw man that's easy to disprove. He sets up really good arguments and then lets them fall through the trap. Another truth taken too far. For example, it's very true that we human beings are often the source of our own troubles. Eliphaz says, "For misery does not come from the earth, nor does trouble sprout from the ground, but human beings are born to trouble, just as sparks fly upward." It's kind of like that famous first line of Scott Peck's famous work, The Road Less Traveled. Do you remember when that exploded under the culture? What was it, the early 70s, I guess? The famous first line of that book, anybody remember it? Life is difficult.
Never mind.
Life is difficult. I think that, in that first line?
Life is difficult.
Yep. Life is difficult. And Peck goes on to say that much of our modern culture's problems come from the fact that we don't understand and accept that basic fact of human existence. Life is difficult. That's the default mode of human existence. Denial of that leads to all kinds of modern psychological problems, says Peck, and I think he's right. Then Eliphaz takes a small bite out of what Elihu will be saying in about 20 chapters or so, and that is the argument that suffering leads to spiritual maturity and spiritual enlightenment. Suffering is God's discipline, you can even say. Suffering can produce spiritual growth. How happy is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal. Then there's a litany, a very true and right, on what God can do for us in our distress. In famine, he will redeem you from death, and in war from the power of the sword. You shall be hidden from the scourge of the tongue, and shall not fear destruction when it comes. At destruction and famine you shall laugh, and shall not fear the wild animals of the earth. For you shall be in league with the stones of the field, and the wild animals shall be at peace with you. You shall know that your tent is safe. You shall inspect your fold and miss nothing. What does this poetry sound like? What does this ring to mind? What other places in the Bible do you hear some stuff like this?
Is Isaiah?
Yeah, Isaiah, exactly. Peaceful kingdom.
Right. Peaceful kingdom.
Now the next line has got to be a little cruel for Job. You shall know that your descendants will be many, and your offspring like the grass of the earth. You shall come to your grave at a ripe old age. Why is this particularly cruel to Job at this moment?
His children have died.
Children have died, yeah. And then, of course, Eliphaz can't help himself to a little bit of pride. He said, see, we have searched this out. It is true. Hear and know it for yourself. We studied this stuff. So the poet is getting, I would say, dangerously close to making the kingdom talk sound like the same kind of talk that condemns Job. God can do this and this and this to the world. So the implication is that to speak out in anger or even lament is to go against that whole tradition of kingdom hope, at least, says Eliphaz. But against all of that, much of which is true, what does Job insist when Job comes back after Eliphaz? He insists on the integrity of his suffering. He insists on the integrity of his own suffering. In other words, he will not pretend that his suffering is not there. He doesn't minimize his suffering, and he does not accept that he deserves it. As one commentator puts it, he will not pretend that his suffering is not there just to get God off the hook. He will not pretend that his suffering is not there just to get God off the hook. So the trap has been set up and is sprung. With that background question hanging out in the distance, that background that we got from last week that we didn't really answer, is our love for God dependent on other blessings? That question's kind of hanging out there in the distance. Hadn't been solved, but it's there. We have this theology, this correct theology, all that God can do for this world, this kingdom talk. We have the truth that none of us is sin-free. Yes, there's an extent to which we reap what we sow. To an extent, we are the cause of much of our suffering. However, Job, like nowhere else in the Bible, Job is a character who insists on the integrity of his own suffering, and even at the expense of all of that theology. Some suffering is so great that it just cannot be explained away like Eliphaz is trying to do. So within 4 chapters, we have the trap, we have it sprung, and we have it, we have, you know, the dramatic role set up. We know what's going to come. We're going to have, and again, it's so brilliant because in a sense, the theology of the Deuteronomists is not completely wrong. I mean, it's a pretty sound argument. So there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot in here to look at as we go along. So, what do you all see? What has jumped out at you all in these first couple of chapters that we haven't mentioned so far? What has kind of gone through your mind that jumped out at you? Before I get to our question, let me just ask that.
I think it's interesting how his wife reacts, as well as his friends, and how steadfast he is, as you've said, to the integrity of his suffering.
Yeah, and the wife of the fable, especially, is just kind of a stick figure.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
she just says, "Oh, curse God."
Yeah.
And it's something says, "Well, that's a woman for you." You know, that's sort of like, you know, that's what it sounds like. The prose, you know. So, you know, that's what I expect from a so and so for a woman, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And but he doesn't do it.
I'm surprised that he doesn't lash out at his friends.
He will.
He will.
He will, I know, but
Give him a couple of chapters.
I don't think I could personally wait that long.
Yeah.
I would be interrupting them from the beginning.
Do you think the friends are? Why? Yeah. Let me ask it another way. Why does it make the friends nervous? Why are they jumping in there and trying to talk him out of it? What are the friends trying to do?
I think they are genuinely concerned about Job, because I think they rely on Job as being a pillar,
Yeah.
and they're worried about what's going on.
There, but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would be thinking their thought is, yeah. The wife, I just was wondering, this is just a thought that popped through my head. Sometimes, and I think particularly in that culture, we may have adopted the thought that the man of the house is their God. So perhaps she saw his suffering as an example of God and suffering her. It sounded really good when I thought of it, but I'm not having a difficult time expressing where I'm coming from. But if I get rid of this guy, then I won't have to deal with God here in my house who isn't living up to my expectations of God. Go ahead, shoot holes in that, because I don't like it myself. But
Well, let me ask about the question, the issue of anger itself. Do y'all remember any sort of prohibitions or teachings growing up about whether you were permitted to be angry at God?
oh, absolutely, you weren't able to be angry at God.
Oh, you were. So you were taught to believe. I mean, you were taught that was okay.
No, I said I was not.
Oh. How did that come about? Do you remember? Any of y'all remember a specific
Denomination? I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and it was very clear that you weren't to be, you just endured. You were stoic.
interested in
That
a
wasn't good.
different way. Were you allowed to be angry at your parents?
No,
Absolutely not.
I I was thinking that this was more of a male-female issue, that where women are not allowed to be angry, period.
Oh, okay.
Whereas men and boys are expected to be angry.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
So taking that one step farther, having grown up a Catholic, it still wasn't okay. I mean, we were taught, first of all, to fear God, be very afraid. Everything was our fault, but men were more, or boys were more sinful than women.
Ah,
And thus they would get angry, but it still was just not okay, but expected.
hmm. How were the rest of y'all taught? What were you taught about anger? And maybe especially like, were you allowed to be angry with your parents?
If I ever talked back to my parents, I would get my mouth washed out with soap, literally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That because that would be disrespectful to me. That you just, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Because my
I have to
parents
say,
didn't want me to be angry with them, but it was okay to be angry with the other parent because my parents were divorced, so they were okay with that. I couldn't be angry with the one I was with.
right.
It's an interesting dynamic.
Mm.
Crazy.
I feel the need to add that many years later, I read a book by a Catholic priest who ultimately left the Catholic Church, called May I Hate God, which was really informative to me.
I had that book and I lost it. I think I gave it away. I was going to use that for this course and I just couldn't find it anywhere. But it's a small, you can read it in a night, but it's very pastoral oriented. That's a great book.
It is. I believe I still have mine because I did give it away and then I found another copy. But
the title is so shocking.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the main character, Job. You know what I mean? I mean, the main, example.
Yes.
In some ways, I think God was used as, if you don't do this, then you're not doing what God wants you to do, and that's bad. That's a sin. Sin will get you in trouble.
Yeah. I can remember things like temper.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just remember that. Don't you got a line. Don't cross that line here, or I'll give you something to cry about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that whole this is the most that whole idea about about showing our respect and our respect for God and God fear of God. That's something to keep in the back of our minds as we read on and to see the revolutionary thing that this poet is doing with Job. So next week,
One thing that strikes me as we talk about this is I grew up in the Baptist church, and we studied the Bible as a child going through Sunday school, perfect attendance. And we had all kinds of Bible stories, but I don't remember them ever discussing with me as a child the book of Job. I wonder why that is. Other than
or if it was, they emphasized the fable part, with the last part. Well, God gave everything back.
uh-huh.
I mean, we never talked about, would the God we pray to, in love and trust, would that God ever make a bet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the absurdity of that is, that's pretty. It's hard to take that literally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we need to get off our Zoom to make way for the next Sunday school class. But if y'all have any further comments or suggestions or anything, email me, Dean Taylor 1955. No periods or anything. Dean Taylor 1955 at gmail.com. And we will continue next week with. Listen to the Joni Mitchell song if you have a chance. It's really, really cool.
I did listen to it. It was cool.
It's really neat. Yeah, yeah. She has a way with words. You let the wicked prosper and let their children frisk like deer. And my loves are dead or dying, or they won't come near. Just. And she has a chorus in the background saying, "We don't despise your chastening. God is correcting you." It's a back and forth dialogue. She has her own Eliphaz in there. It's just really, it's really pretty brilliant. Okay. We will see you all next week.
Did you ever post the syllabus?
Yes.
Yes, it's on there. It should be. It's on the web page, and it's on the advertisement, the illumination.
Okay.
Yeah. So just take a look at that. If you don't see that, let me know.
Or you can get it from Rebecca.
Yeah. But like I say, it's on I saw where it wasn't there the first weekend, but Cindy added it on the web page. I don't know about the app, but it is on on that thing. So yeah. Okay. So it's time to get off, but y'all have a good week and read the next. I don't have that in front of me right now, but it's syllabus is on there.
Okay.
Y'all take care. See you in church.
Righto. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
How do we get out of here now? I'm not finding hit the road, Jack. I want to get out of here. This is definitely his screen. And he's still, something's wrong. Maybe it's over here. It's it.